Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Elevenses, the topical news, controversial views, and the biking tips show. It's Wednesday. It's the 8th of April. I think it's the 8th of April. And you're live with Kevin Williams here of Survival Skills Rider Training based in London. Right, okay, so on with the show. What have we got for today's stories? Well, I'm going to start off by giving you some updates on just how COVID-19 is actually affecting the world of motorcycling. As you probably know, if you follow me regularly, I'm fairly interested in electric motorcycle technology, so I'll be announcing a change to the home and work charging schemes, which the government have recently talked about. We'll also be talking about rider safety while we're out there in lockdown. And last but not least, today's better biking tip. It will be all about why we don't put the bike where our brain hasn't been 3 seconds earlier. So that'll come up last. So stay tuned to the end of the show if you can. And if you can't, don't forget that you can catch up with us on our YouTube channel, which is Survival Skills UK. Don't forget that UK on the end of it, or you won't find me. You'll probably get somebody showing you some interesting hunting knives or something. Okay, so don't forget, if you've got anything to say, any comments on the stories, any questions you want to ask, or suggestions for me, things to cover in a future show, just use the comment box and I'll get back to you at the end of the show when I actually go off air. I can't write and type at the same time. Can't talk and type at the same time. Okay, so so that's it. Well, on with the first story then. Basically, this is let's start with the bike sales. The figures for March sales have just come out, and not unsurprisingly, they have tumbled thanks to the pandemic. Broadly speaking, motorcycle sales were growing through February, which is pretty good because it's often the time of year when we don't see particularly strong sales, but they were up on last year. About 7% in fact, but the March figures are down around 12% on the same period last year. Now, given the circumstances, it's hardly a surprise, but it shows the stress that the motorcycle industry generally is under. The effects look set to last well beyond the next couple of months too. So what else has been going on? Well, there are two big motorcycle shows towards the end of the year, November each year, Milan and Cologne. These are both huge shows. and BMW have just announced that they will not be attending them. They'd already pulled their plug on their big summer sort of riding event where owners are invited to come along and meet BMW in person. But the two big shows are way down the line, well beyond the point at which people have been talking about everything sort of slowly begin to return to normal. They're huge shows, as I said, and the importance can't be understated. They are the launch point for the following year's new models. So it's a really significant step for BMW to have pulled out of this show. Now, it turns out that BMW aren't alone on this decision. KTM have followed suit, and they've gone a little bit further, actually, because they've actually called on the organisers to cancel these shows. KTM have made a statement saying that they promise to push ahead with current and future projects in order to provide the motorcycling market with exciting and innovative models and look for the best ways to showcase these developments. So expect to see some online launches. That's what I anticipate. They mean Honda have already gone down that route. They're also talking about the difficulties of the coming months in terms of a quote, small squeeze on the brake. But they say that their hands are, again, quote, very much poised on the throttle for the rest of 2020. Okay, so that's BMW and KTM. What's been going on further afield? Well, obviously, a lot of motorcycles these days are built in China. And the lockdown, whilst it's being eased now in the Wuhan area, it has severely disrupted the Chinese motorcycle industry. January to March are apparently the busiest months, generally speaking, in China, presumably because they're building models for the following, or for the summer months that follow fairly soon from there on. But factories either had to shut down because of the coronavirus or were affected by the interruption to their supply chain. Zhongshan, for example, based near Wuhan, and they actually went into lockdown themselves. But the Evoque electric motorcycle business, they are based in Beijing, and although Beijing wasn't specifically affected to the extent that Wuhan was, they found their supply chain interrupted. So their own supplies of bikes have been problematic. On a more cheery note, Maidstone Honda are supplying 20 Honda PCX scooters to support the NHS volunteer responders. You remember that the call went out for people to volunteer to help the NHS. And one of the ways that this help was needed was to actually be delivering essential medical supplies, prescriptions, and so on to the community. And so Maidstone Honda have put these bikes forward. They'll be used to deliver medical supplies, prescriptions, as I said, to the most vulnerable, those people most at risk from COVID-19. And that will allow those individuals to stay at home and self-isolate. So that's a great idea. Neil Fletcher, head of motorcycles at Honda UK, he said, quote, "It's inspiring how quickly 750,000 people signed up to the NHS volunteer responders in the UK. And I'm delighted to see Maidstone Honda playing its part at this difficult time, despite being closed for regular business. We wholly endorse their decision to supply the scooters to boost all important delivery capacity in the local community, ensuring those at high risk receive the supplies they need." Harry Pearce, who's the general manager of Maidstone Honda, he said, "We've been a proud member of the local community since 2013 and wanted to do what we can to lend a hand. Those at high risk have been told not to leave their homes 12 weeks, have it doubly tough. They can't shop for groceries or collect medical prescriptions. So they depend on volunteers. And it's these volunteers we're hoping to mobilise with this fleet of PCXs. It's the least we could do, and he really hopes it'll make a difference." Well, good on Maidstone Honda. Right, okay, so where are we? That's the first news story of the show. Just a quick reminder that you're watching Kevin Williams here of Survival Skills, and the show is called Elevenses. Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday at 11. And still to come, we're talking about charging points in just a moment. I'll be talking about bikers who are still crashing, and we'll finish up with a tip about why we need 3 seconds between us and any hazard to respond reasonably reliably. Right, okay, so electric motorcycles. Yeah, one of my growing passions, I'd say. The thing about motorcycles is obviously electric bikes are fairly short range, but that doesn't mean they're not ideal for city use. Problem is getting them charged up, and putting charging points into houses for quick charging actually costs quite a lot of money. So you've got two choices. You either charge from a sort of conventional 13 amp 3-pin plug, which will take you overnight basically to do the job on anything with a decent sized battery on it, or you invest in a high performance charging circuit. Now, up to now, motorcycling hasn't been supported apparently by the schemes to subsidise the installation of these devices, but the Department for Transport and their Office for Low Emission Vehicles has announced that there will be a change to the electric vehicle home charge scheme and the workplace charging schemes. And basically, this means that a wider range of vehicles will benefit, and that includes electric motorcycles. Currently, only cars and vans are eligible, so that's the change up. So from the 1st of April this year, so it's already gone into place, this one, the grant will be set at £350 towards the cost of purchase and installation of a charge point at home. The cost also for the workplace scheme is also £350. Now, okay, it's a bit of a reduction from the original 500, which the early adopters got, but it still represents a decent saving if you're looking to think about shifting to an electric motorcycle. Okay, the Department for Transport's there say that the change will enable twice as many people to benefit from the grant as formerly. So this will also support, obviously, the increasing numbers of electric vehicles on the road. As it happens, I'll be looking at the latest new bike from Zero, who you should know as an electric bike manufacturer. I'll be looking at their bike in the next show. Okay, so where are we at the moment? You're still watching Elevenses with Kevin Williams. Don't forget, if you can't read, if you can't ride the bike, you can still read about biking. So my paperback books are still available to order from my author site. I was going to put you the link up, but I seem to have missed the link. Is that it? That's it there. There it is. So have a look there, and you'll find all my books available online. Right, okay, we finish off with a tip about why we need 3 seconds to respond reliably to things going on in front of us on the road. But just before we do that, I'm just going to make yet another appeal to riders to try to ride safely out there at the moment. Now, okay, you may think I'm laying this on a bit thick, that I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but there's a good reason for that. I'm not going to apologize for saying what I'm saying. Under normal circumstances, we have around 1 fatal crash per day, and there will be around 10 crashes per day, which are classed as serious injuries. It's basically something that either requires a stay overnight in hospital, or it requires some kind of medical intervention. So a finger that required pinning would be a serious injury, but so would concussion, which could have serious consequences. They tend to bring you in to monitor. It could also be serious internal injuries that put you in a bed for months. So at the moment, as I say, or under normal circumstances, think 1 fatal crash, 10 serious crashes. What's happening at the moment? Well, even though the traffic levels have dropped down dramatically. We're talking mid-1950s levels here in London, which is a huge reduction in the number of traffic. Guess what? Every single day, my newsfeed is bringing me reports on fatal and serious crashes. This is what arrived in my newsfeed this morning. 3 reports. The first came from Lincolnshire, and it was a report of a motorcyclist who was seriously injured after a crash on the A16. It's reported as a collision, which presumably means there's another vehicle involved. Market Deeping around 7 o'clock on Monday evening. Now we've moved into the long daylight hours, so this isn't a crash at night. It's a daytime crash. It's a daylight crash, even though the sun could be a little bit awkward at that time of the evening. We should be able to see what we're doing. Second was a fatal accident up in the West Midlands. Now this was in the small hours between Monday night and Tuesday morning. The emergency services were apparently called to reports of a crash in the Birmingham area, and they found a rider and the passenger both seriously injured at the scene of the crash. The paramedics worked on both of them, obviously, but they couldn't save one. A 45-year-old rider called Heinrich Ertl, who was believed to have been the motorcycle rider, died at the scene, unfortunately. A 20-year-old passenger has been taken to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham with serious arm injuries, and he was still there as of this morning. Now, the police in this particular crash believe that there was no other vehicle involved. So it looks like the motorcyclist fell off alone. Now, the photo that I've seen of the crash scene suggests that the accident happened on a fairly gently curved bit of dual carriageway. Now, dual carriageways have barriers down the middle, as we know, generally speaking, Armco barrier, so a nasty thing to fall off into. But it's got a 40 limit on it. Now, okay, the implication appears to be that the rider lost control somewhere on that bend. Whether or not he hit the barrier, I don't know. That's speculation on my part if he did. But honestly, a 40-mile-per-hour crash, even if we fall off at 40 miles per hour, we're not going to slide all that far. We'd have to really go off at a sort of very strange tangent to slide into the barrier. So I leave you to draw your own conclusions about what happened there at 1 o'clock in the morning. And that's not the only fatal crash from yesterday, sadly. I got another report in the same feed. The statement was released later yesterday afternoon by Devon and Cornwall police, confirming that the man had died, 30-year-old, died following a collision with a refuse disposal collection vehicle. The rider sustained, again, serious injuries at the scene of the crash and was confirmed dead at the scene, and his next of kin have also been informed. And, you know, I'm sitting here in my very quiet back garden without all the usual hum of tube trains and jets flying overhead from Heathrow and just the traffic going up and down the road. What can I hear? Well, it's motorcycle exhausts over and over again. I mentioned the other day that I heard a bike with a really distinctive and very raucous exhaust note accelerating away at high speed from the local set of traffic lights. Since then, I've heard it, what sounds like the same bike, at least twice more. You know, now, even if the flow of traffic around the area is at 1950s levels, it's still an urban area. And it still comes with all the hazards you'd expect. Junctions, pedestrians, parked cars, bus stops, everything nothing has changed in terms of the problem. Yes, the traffic is lighter, but it doesn't mean that those hazards don't exist. But listening to that bike accelerate, that guy's not taking it steady. He's really giving it a big handful away from the lights. He's hitting some high speeds by the time I hear him roll off the throttle. It's not a 125 with a noisy exhaust. It's a big V twin. That rider's clearly not paying an awful lot of attention to the speed limit. And sadly, if he's not paying attention to the speed limit, there's a fair chance that he will also become a statistic at some point in the near future. So again, I'm saying to everybody out there, tell everybody you know, tell all your mates, put it up on social media, make people aware that if they are taking their life in their hands on their bike, they're not just affecting themselves anymore. The emergency services are all hard pressed. So if we do crash out there, it's going to take a while for the emergency services to reach us in the first place. And even if we do survive the initial crash, we're going to be taking up a badly needed bed in the hospitals. So if you can, stay home. If you can't, ride more carefully than you normally do. Don't take that empty road at face value. The same crashes are still happening out there every single day. And as we're not seeing that reduction in crashes that we would expect from traffic levels dropping back so far. Right, okay. Apologies for the little rant there, but I feel it is important that this message goes out and is repeated. Now, okay, don't forget, you can join me every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday for Elevenses at 11 o'clock. BST. So I'm going to finish off with the skills tips item that I mentioned. Now this one came up in response to one of my regular written posts. If you've been following Facebook and survival skills on there for any length of time, you'll know that for many years I stuck to writing. Writing is my game, as it were. It's my strength. So I've written posts for I think 2012 was the first one that went up on Facebook. So we're into 8 years of product on there. So I've had a regular series that goes up every Saturday called Skills on Saturday, and oddly enough, that goes up on the at the weekend. Now, in this case, what I was writing about was another of my favourite subjects. Why it is important that we need to understand how crashes actually happen if we are going to have effective strategies to avoid them. It's a theme I return to over and over because it's absolutely crucial to staying safe on a motorcycle. If you don't understand crashing, then how do you know that you're not going to crash? It's as simple as that. So it's a theme that I return to, yet the interesting thing is it's still almost completely overlooked by conventional road safety messages. As part of the discussion, I talk about the role of surprise. Now, again, I've talked about this at length in my written posts, but just to summarize, Keith Code many years ago identified what he called survival reactions. These were responses by a rider to a threat of personal harm. When something started to pan out badly and the rider could see that it basically is going to hurt, then the rider's response tends to be one that they've not been taught. It comes from basic primal instinct. Think what we do if we're standing there and we suddenly see a tiger on the loose. We would probably do one of two things. Run away as fast as possible, try and get somewhere safer, or stand stock still and don't do anything and hope the tiger doesn't see us. Those are survival reactions, and they also kick in when we're on a motorcycle. As soon as we do something on a bike which puts us at risk, then we tend to run headlong into these ancient primal responses. They're instinctive, nothing we can do about them. Except learn to try to avoid them. The sort of things I'm talking about here are overreactions. Panic grabs of the brakes are a classic example, which is why we've got ABS on modern machines. Freezing, doing nothing. Very, very difficult one to overcome. If you've actually frozen, you're not going to stop, you're not going to swerve, you're in trouble. Target fixation. Once we spot we're in trouble, we tend to look at what's causing us the worry. If that's the hedge on the outside of a right-hand bend, that's where we tend to go. We tend to head for the hedge. If it's a Scania coming the other way on the outside of a left-hand bend, again, we tend to head straight to the Scania. If it's a car pulled out of a junction, we tend to hit the brakes and go straight into the car, even when there was room to take evasive action by swerving. So these inappropriate responses come when we're scared. Now, why are we scared? Well, generally speaking, it's because something happened that we weren't anticipating. A situation in front of us on the bike developed in a way that we weren't expecting it to go. Um, and why do we do that? Well, we tend to assume that everything will go right. Our experience is based on successful performance of everything we do. Think about it. How often do we actually crash? Um, Even the most accident-prone riders don't crash that often. They actually manage to do significant distances between the spills. And most riders will often go their entire riding lives without a serious accident. And the result is that when things do go seriously wrong, it's a big shock. We're not simply not on the wavelength that says to us this situation may go wrong. It's never gone wrong before. Why should it go wrong today? Because there's always a chance it might go wrong. So what we actually have to do is we have to make a mental switch about from thinking that we're in control of the situation to remembering that, yes, we are attempting to control the situation, but there's always a chance things might go wrong. And what we need to look for is the way those things can go wrong. If 1,000 cars stop and wait for us at a junction, we have to look for the 1,001st where the driver doesn't spot us and pulls out. If we get 1,000 bends absolutely spot on, that's not what we need to pat ourselves on the back about. We need to look for that extra bend, the 1,001st bend that doesn't go where we're anticipating. It's the same with all kinds of crashes. We have to be looking for things to go wrong. We have to be expecting that surprise, because it's the surprise, the scary moment, that triggers those reactions that Keith Code was talking about so many years ago. Now, I was talking about making assumptions when following other vehicles and not assuming that somebody would carry on going just because there's nothing in front of them. This all came about because somebody said we could compromise our following distance because we could look past the car and we could see if the driver was going to stop. No, we can't. Of course we can't. We have absolutely no idea what that driver is going to do. He could suddenly spot the driveway that he's been looking for and is about to overshoot. He could easily stamp on the brake. He could see a hazard that we can't. He could see the small child about to run into the road from behind a hedge, which we can't see from 20 meters further back. He could suffer a mechanical failure. I blew the guts out of a car engine some years ago. I think I mentioned this fairly recently. I lost all the cooling fluid, and by the time I realised there was a problem, the engine seized solid and the vehicle locked up and skidded to a halt. Now, fortunately, nobody was following me too close, but if somebody had been relying on me carrying on as normal because there was an empty bit of road in front of me, they would have run straight slap bang into the middle of my people carrier. So we have to assume that things will go wrong. And one of the ways that we can do this is by using something that a contributor of mine talked about, Duncan McKillop, one of my regulars. What he said was, the average accident, I'll read it, takes just 3 seconds to go from happy and smiling to twitching in the gutter. Not a lot of time when you think about it, but the clues to the upcoming accident are often in plain sight for a lot longer than that. Well, yes, the clues are often there, but that's not what I want to talk about today. I just want to concentrate on that 3 seconds because it prompted a query. Somebody asked, where did this 3 seconds idea actually come from? Well, it's a good question. I've heard this rule variously stated as don't put the bike where your eyes haven't been 3 seconds earlier, or don't put the bike where your brain hasn't been 3 seconds earlier, or other versions. There are various ways of saying the same thing, but they're all trying to get over the same point. We need time, because time allows us to recognize what we're seeing. It allows us time to formulate a plan, and it allows us time to execute that plan, or to put it as the US-based Motorcycle Safety Foundation say, search, evaluate, execute. It's a really good way of thinking about what we're doing on the road, superior to the police system, in my opinion, but that's another story. But why 3 seconds? That was the point I was trying to make. Well, I believe it originally arose from the work of a chap called Harry Hurt. You may have heard of him. He produced something called the Hurt Report from his studies, which took place in California back in the early 1980s. Now, Hurt's work has largely stood the test of time. It is 40 years old, but some things have changed, bike technology, for example. But what he found in terms of accidents really hasn't changed very much. Anyway, move on a few years, and a researcher by the name of James Ulay picked up Hertz's work. Ulay was actually one of Hertz's original research team, and one of the things he continued to look at were junction collisions. And he did quite a lot of work on this, and he measured the time and distance in a lot of crashes, and what he concluded was that 3 seconds is actually the cut-off point. If we're approaching a junction and things go wrong and we have more than 3 seconds in hand, maybe a car makes what's called a right-of-way violation by pulling into our path, then if we have more than 3 seconds, we are likely to respond appropriately and avoid a crash. However, if riders have less than 3 seconds, then generally they don't avoid the crash. Now, hang on a minute, 3 seconds. I won't do the maths, but you can do it yourself. 13 meters per second is basically your distance you travel at 30 miles an hour. So, well, we'll do the maths. 3 seconds, you are traveling 3 times 13, which is nearly 40 meters. 40 meters. Think about your stop-in distance from 30 miles an hour. Guess what it is? It's about 10 meters. So why aren't riders actually stopping in that distance? Well, anyway, research papers are all well and good, but few riders read them. So I think it was a chap called Royce Creasy. He was a rather eccentric engineer and a writer here in the UK back in the 80s, who adopted Hertz's findings, and he created this more general rule, I believe. I think it goes back to him about never putting your bike where your eyes haven't been. Okay, why 3 seconds? Well, it's all to do with the 3 components of taking emergency action. We have the mechanical response time. So that's what happens from the moment we start to pull the lever to the moment the bike actually comes to a complete standstill. That's one part of it. The second part of it is the reaction time. This is the time it takes for the signal to go from the brain down your arm to your brake lever or your foot pedal. That typically is something like about 0.5 of a second, 0.6 of a second, maybe a little bit longer if you get older. But there's something missing from those calculations. That doesn't add up to anything like 3 seconds. And the third part is the so-called cognitive delay. Now, this is where the brain actually processes the information. We have to see there is a problem, we have to understand the problem, and we have to come up with a solution to that problem. And then we have to apply it. So the 2 bits in the highway code are the outcome of our decision making, but that decision making takes time. Highway code doesn't deal with cognitive delay. The police have found that typically they're often an inexplicable delay in responding to an emergency, and what they find is that the vehicle's real stopping distance in real life is often very much longer than what the highway code suggests it should be. And they usually blame lack of attention, suggesting that had the driver been on the ball or the rider, then they could have stopped a lot more quickly. But it's down to this surprise issue. Highway code doesn't account for the fact that we do not react instantly to the unexpected. We have to absorb information and process it to make sense of it and then do something. So we can be as alert as we like, but if we've never been in a particular situation that requires an emergency response, then the chances of us pulling a rabbit out of the hat in a fraction of a second are pretty damn poor. We will actually take time to think, hang on a minute, what's happening here? What do I do about it? And then do it. And all that happens as I say, before we can begin to react. And that's why we have this the 2 or 3 second delay sometimes between emergency developing and driver actually responding. And that's why we get caught out even when we're alert and paying attention. So the highway code fails to take that into account. Harry Hertz talked about this 40 odd years ago, Royce Creasy 40 years ago, and it should be staple of all better riding courses. But frankly, we're still missing that vital piece of information from driver training, in my opinion. And you know, it basically it's part of the reason that rock bike crashes are pretty much unchanged since Harry Hurt's work. We're still falling off where we always did. So the evidence really is that the approach that tells people to concentrate isn't enough. We actually have to tell them why they need to focus. Right. Okay. So amazingly, we're out of time again. 30 minutes have simply flown by. So I hope you have enjoyed today's show. I'll be back on Friday with the next episode of Elevenses and news, views, and more tips. In the meantime, don't forget to pop over to Facebook, check out my written posts, come over there, give me a bit of support. Everybody's off Facebook at the moment, I suspect because they are not at work and not sneaking a look behind the scenes. But for now, thanks for watching, and hopefully catch you next time out. Yeah, that's sorry, that's it. I was just reading my notes, and that is it for today. All right, so again, thanks very much for watching, and see you hopefully on Friday. Take care for now.